Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Dale Julin, another episode of The Case Breakers, focusing this time once again on the Zodiac killer case and the latest information that's coming out since the Case Breakers broke the story back in October of last year. I want to first off introduce the folks who are joining us today who are intimately involved in this investigation. Jennifer Bucholtz is an Army veteran, licensed private investigator, instructor of forensics and criminal justice at the American Military University. She also heads up the university's volunteer cold case team, currently investigating the unsolved murder of Debbie Williamson, and she hosts the podcast Break the Case, which covers her team's work on cases. Jen, good to talk to you again.
Hi, Dale. I'm really excited to be here today with you and Eric, and very much looking forward to our conversation that we're going to have.
And on that note, Eric Kleinsmith has over 30 years of experience in intelligence and security as a U.S. Army military intelligence officer, defense contractor, academic, author, cold case investigator. He is was the focus of the 2010 book, The Watchers, The Rise of America's Surveillance State, one of the main subjects of that book by Shane Harris. And he's also the author of many articles and the 2020 book entitled Intelligence Operations, Understanding Data, Tools, People, and Processes. Eric, thanks for joining us again on this case.
Dale, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And it's great to see Jennifer again, ready to go.
On this video podcast, we get a chance to stretch things out a little bit and squeeze things in, but I don't want to bury the lead because for those of you who are interested in the Zodiac killer case, there are many people, indeed worldwide, for which this is a case of cases. This is a case that has been like the top of unsolved cases over the decades. And now, thanks to the work of Case Breakers and you folks and moi, we have a suspect, Gary Francis Post, with an E on the end of Post, who appears, for all intents and purposes, to have been the Zodiac killer. I don't want to bury the lead. This case, since it broke in October of last year, has been moving forward. We want to get into the latest in the forensics and the DNA and the witnesses in general terms. You got to keep it general here, folks, because, as you know, a documentary network partner has joined up with the Case Breakers, and we want to make sure we leave some for the documentary. But for now, let's get into what's happened since October. Eric, first, let folks know a little bit about what Case Breakers is as a team.
Case Breakers was first conceived and founded and is now led by Tom Colbert and his lovely wife, Donna. I first had contact with Tom after a testimony I had to give on the Able Danger program in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and House Armed Service Committee 2005-2006. And since that time, Tom and I have been working together on a variety of pieces. And so, and the first one really was the 2011 startup of the D.B. Cooper case. And we've walked that for the past 11 years up through 2 documentaries and just numerous articles and Tom's book. So it's just been an extension of that. And that became kind of the core of putting together a team of experts who are from all kinds of walks of life, from professionally, geographically, and Tom has been able to masterfully put together such a diverse set of experience and expertise on this team that we have been very fortunate in understanding some of the key pieces on how to go after and how to break cases that are decades and decades, cold. And so that's really been how the Case Breakers started. And Tom has really been a fantastic steward of moving us forward, getting us organized, and keeping our eye on the cases that matter and going from there.
They are a serious bunch, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Jennifer, you know forensics, right? Let's take a moment now to get to the case, the Zodiac killer case, and what's been happening since the story broke worldwide in October, thanks to the Case Breakers. I have to tell you on a personal note, since I was working on this story for 5 to 6 years, and it was a tremendous burden was lifted off my shoulders because of what the Case Breakers were able to do with their team of experts. Now, among them you, since the story broke, some folks have come forward. We're going to keep it to the information that's mostly out in the press already, but we've already had the information that came out about a bunch of potential ballistics evidence. Can you go into that?
Sure. Well, since the press release last October, as you just said, a lot of people have come forward who knew Gary Francis Post or knew of him or lived in his neighborhood or whatnot. And we've actually really expanded our source network in terms of people, that could provide us information about him. But one of the valuable things that we've received now is several people who actually brought us used or spent shell casings that Gary Francis Post gave to them. And through as best and proper chain of custody turnover that we could conduct as civilians, team members from our team went to these people and collected those shell casings. And so the next step is probably obvious to most of our audience members, but we are seeking out and obtaining the help of some ballistics experts from around the country to do some analysis and create official ballistics reports that we can then take to the various police departments that investigated the Zodiac cases in hopes that, they will take our ballistics report and compare it to theirs from shell casings found at their scenes and see if we can get a match. Obviously, if there's a match, that gives us, one step closer to confirming that Gary Post did in fact commit this string of murders. So that's essentially where we are on the ballistics right now. And like you said, there's actually a lot more going on with that, but we're keeping it more to a general sense right now in terms of what we're revealing to the public.
Eric, on the general sense, how do you think the case stands at this point? Because, as you know so well, cold case investigators, their method is essentially to eliminate other suspects until you have the one that probably done it. How do you think that stands with the case of Gary Francis Post at this point?
That actually changes in terms of how the approach that we've taken, and this has been in several cold cases that we're now looking at, where your investigator, it goes back. If you've picked up a case that is cold, their first step is to take a look at what happened during the crime initially, and then branch out there with several hypotheses of it could be A, B, C, or D. And for our team, what we found is we've been given what I call the spark, something that has rekindled the investigation, but the spark is usually something at the tail end of the investigation where it just came to us and said, and you were that spark for us, where you said, look, I think I have the person. And so instead of going and checking each individual hypotheses from, gosh, it was this guy, it was this guy, it was this guy, it's now, here's one guy that it could be. Now let's reverse engineer them and figure out, how can we eliminate him and eliminate him as a suspect. With this particular case, the longer we looked at it, we couldn't eliminate him, and more things fell into place. The D.B. Cooper case with identifying Rackstraw was the same way, where somebody said, I think he's the one. And as we started going through his case, it turned out, more and more things lined up, and we found nothing that was exculpatory or mitigating or anything that exonerated this person. So that's where we found when Post came up, it became more and more of a focus of not only confirming the different details, but now we're down to the point where we are, again, like we've talked, we're into the ballistics, we're into the DNA, we're into the specific forensic pieces to be able to tie all of the circumstantial evidence together of time and place and witnesses and those kind of pieces of information that have been around for decades.
Jennifer, when I came to you, it's partly out of desperation, because I had sent you, right? I had sent you a copy of my unpublished book about Gary Francis Post.
Yes.
And because those really good cold case detectives in San Francisco and Vallejo, they pushed forward trying to prove it to him, but they never prove it was Post. They investigated him, right? They got his DNA. They interviewed him in jail, right? They checked the background of him. And yet they took all my information, and it was great.
Yeah.
Only one problem. They never went before a microphone and said Gary Francis Post was a Zodiac killer suspect. So we were stuck as journalists. But at that point, I came to you, and then you introduced me to Eric, and then to Tom Colbert and company. And it has just gone from there.
Yeah, it was a bit of a chain of events for you and me because I wasn't really sure where to turn. As you know, and the audience knows, once I read your manuscript, I mean, I was convinced that you had the right guy, but it was a matter of like, okay, now what? Because you had done so much legwork already, trying to get law enforcement to sit down with you and review your research and either confirm or refute it, and that hadn't happened. But yeah, thankfully, through the university I work at, eventually I was put in touch with Eric, who, as he already explained, knew Tom Colbert and has worked with him for years. So they were really a saving grace for you and me, because I'm not quite sure where we would have turned otherwise. I think we would have kept pushing forward and probably made some progress, but I don't think we would be at the same point we'd be at without these guys on the case breakers.
I have an old friend, sorry to interrupt, but I have an old friend who's a retired cold case investigator, and he summed it up, the case for me a while back. He said, he died in a secure facility in 2018. So there'll be no court case. At some point, one of the district attorneys in Solano County or San Francisco will just simply decide it's time to close the case because of a preponderance of evidence. Eric, if you could go into that, because that's where we're eventually going to get. At some point, a district attorney is going to step up.
Right. Well, again, that his death changes the entire case from a cold case to really more of a historical investigation, and that's then that changes the demeanor, that changes the response from law enforcement. There's, again, with so many cases that pop up every year, do we want to spend, every law enforcement agency that's involved or had any kind of involvement, they got to ask themselves, do we want to keep spending our time and resources going after somebody who's probably dead? Or do you want to work on the ones that are current, that have, current ongoing victims, missing exploited children or something like that? And so there is a hesitancy from law enforcement to spend, again, time and resources to do it. And then the other thing is just the risk. There's a lot of agencies that I'm sure just would. It's called the MIGA, make it go away. What do I need to do to make you guys go away and do your own thing? But when it gets down to, hey, well, we do need your cooperation for such and such and such evidence, the standard operating is we will back you up. We will back you up and tell you you've solved the case once you've proven to us that you've solved the case.
Jen, go into that for a bit.
Well, I want to back up to something you said a few minutes ago, which is that no law enforcement agency has gotten behind a microphone to confirm your research and findings. But let's also make it crystal clear that no law enforcement agency has stepped behind the microphone to say that Post is not the Zodiac. That is a misconception. That's a misconception that I've seen going around a lot, where people are saying, "Oh, law enforcement already said it's not him." No, they have not said that. Yeah. They haven't confirmed or refuted your findings. So I just want to make that clear that he is still a viable suspect in the eyes of all these law enforcement agencies, even though none of them wants to publicly discuss it. Right. And so I forgot your question now.
No, on that point, let's roll on that for a second here, because the role of the case breakers is to assist law enforcement in these cold cases, because there's so many cold cases go unsolved because there's so few resources. Eric, that's what case breakers is all about. So we are hoping, you are hoping that at a certain point, Vallejo Police, San Francisco Police, maybe the FBI, they've been contacted 4 times by me. Maybe they went and they investigated in 2015 on our first tip. The first people we went to was the FBI. They went up, they got snowed. This is public reports now. The folks who talked to them in Groveland, they, essentially saw that the Post instantly started getting dementia when the FBI showed up, that sort of thing. I'm hoping that these agencies, right, will just simply go, okay, it was Post. You got most of the evidence right there, right? Okay, we double check. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm hoping the FBI says, yes, we solved the case. The only problem is they walked away from it in 2015. And I went back to them several times over the years, gave them the evidence, and it just kind of went into a black hole called the San Francisco FBI office. I'm still stunned that they took the word of a serial killer who pretended to be going senile when the FBI showed up, and they simply walked away.
Right. Well, and that's what we're running into is a cultural barrier, and and that culture is centered around risk, and it's almost as a two-dimensional type of a decision-making process. A, this is going to make us look really good. All right, let's back it. B, there's some risk that we could look really bad in this. All right, then sweep it under the rug, minimize contact with the individuals involved, and for Intel has the intelligence community has the same problem, and so it's like when you have a group from the outside, and Intel is practiced commercially all over the place. So now, cold case investigations. There's private citizens that are doing these kinds of investigations. How do we change the culture so that some of the most credible pieces of evidence and the most credible investigations are now looked on as not pariahs of law enforcement, but cooperative partners and supporters of law enforcement? And that's that cultural barrier that has to be broken in order for folks to. I mean, again, you ran into the same problems that we're running into now, where the message we've gotten back is, we'll go forward and tell everybody that the case is broken. Once you've broken it and proven it to us, then we'll help you out to solve it. I mean, that it's a no risk proposition for them, but you're now given the requirement to do such amount of legwork that there's no risk for them, and that's almost impossible without their initial cooperation. So how do you get them to cooperate when they won't cooperate to begin with? It's just a vicious loop now.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm so hopeful about case breakers going forward with this case, because the documentary deal with the network. Because there's a lot of hurting people. There's a lot of hurting people around the Zodiac killer case. The victims' families going back 50 years, holding a hope. Yep. The thousands and thousands of people that I knew growing up that were terrorized by this guy, including yours truly, who'd like to simply have some peace on this. And the local authorities in Tuolumne County, and those are the counties that are associated with this case, they have a responsibility, even after all these years, to living, breathing people who now know that Uncle Gary was a Zodiac killer. What are you going to do about it? Jen?
Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Bay Area. This was before my time, but my parents both grew up in the Bay Area, and most of the rest of my family. I mean, this person terrorized that entire area of California. And as Tom has said many times on interviews, there's at least 20 family members of Zodiac victims who are still alive and deserve answers. And of course, the victims themselves, even though they're not alive, they deserve those answers too. And so does the community that was terrorized by this person. And I find it a little egregious that we're now handing them pretty much hard evidence in terms of DNA evidence and ballistics, but yet not getting any cooperation, when, as Eric said, it really is little risk to a department to take this hard evidence that we're giving them and do a comparison behind the scenes. You don't have to go public with it if it doesn't match. Or you can, if you want to say, nope, they were totally wrong. Okay, whatever. We're just after the answers. Even though, the three of us and everybody at the Case Breakers thinks Post was a Zodiac, we're okay with being proven wrong too. Because even if we find out he wasn't, that's still a major answer in this investigation and can allow us to move forward one way or the other. So, that's just my thinking on it.
Yeah, Eric, there are people in Groveland and other areas where he was living who knew him personally, who now, this whole case is the talk of Groveland, a small town just near Yosemite. When I talk with some witnesses and all, they're saying, everyone's going, okay, why haven't you pushed forward Tuolumne County? Right? Why haven't you pushed forward FBI? Right. Why aren't you calling us? We're telling you right now, these witnesses, not you, not me, right, but these witnesses are saying, why haven't they knocked on our door recently?
Right.
Eric?
And that's the cultural piece is, do you want to risk reopening the case again as a bureau a generation later? Nobody who worked this case still works. is, they're all retired from the initial investigation on. And so as a organization, though, you are now saddled with the fact that your agency, whether it's local county sheriff's office or to San Francisco PD, to the FBI, you're now saddled with a case that you've never solved. Who wants to go and tear that scab open again and expose yourself and all your foibles to the rest of the world? So it is a public relations deal. And again, that this is the risky version. Why do aversion to risk? Why would I want to go reopen that again and then not get it again based upon a private investigative team who we've not really checked out, or we're there is a chance that they could be wrong. That's the cultural that we have to get over. And Jen's quite right. Nobody has come back and said, even once when we were doing interviews in October when we broke the case, good Lord, the comment sections on the different shows we had done, they were lighting up with this guy's an idiot. These guys are smoking dope. They have no idea what they're talking about. But still, nobody's ever come across with any concrete evidence that Post is not the one. Whereas almost all the other suspects have been discounted officially in one way or another. And that's where, when you've eliminated all the other possibilities, Post remains as the viable suspect, and we are now at the point to really diving in trying to break that final forensic barrier with the investigation.
To that point, Jennifer, when you read my book, right? I'm saying somebody with the right background's got to read this book. You wrote a great article online that nailed Gary Francis Post as a Zodiac killer, even though you didn't know who Gary Francis Post was. But in terms of his MO, who he was, that's why I contacted you, because you nailed it. So then when you read my book, if you could go into just briefly the evidence at the tree, the evidence of Gary Francis Post doing something very strange, leaving anagram solutions for the press and the public and the police to try to figure out. And after all these years, because I had his name, that was the cipher key. Jen,
yes.
And the most important thing is, and I'm hoping a lot of folks, of course, have already read the article, so I can kind of jump forward here. But, I had never been to Zephyr Cove. And yet all I did was take the anagram solutions, the probable anagram solution by the guy, Gary Francis Post, find out how he did it. And then when I took these 3 anagram solutions to Zephyr Cove, a place I'd never been to before, they took us right to that evidence site at the tree, which needs to be investigated again. I saw somebody criticize me afterwards because they saw one thing online. It's amazing how we all depend upon Google instead of regular investigating work.
Right.
He goes in and goes, the dock at Zephyr Cove was not used by the MS Dixie until 1972, and you said he left the bones of Donna Lass in a tree at Zephyr Cove in 1970. Dale swings and misses. You can take a look. The dock was there. It was lengthened in the 1960s. The MS Dixie was floating around on Lake Tahoe since like the 1960s as well. I didn't say that Gary Francis Post was the captain of the MS Dixie. I didn't say that at all.
Right.
But they were there, and he used them as a way of pointing out where he put the bones of Donna Lass in a bear cache at Zephyr Cove next to his RV park. And that's just really weird. It's true. That's the problem. It has the charm of being true, Jen.
Yeah, that was really the linchpin for me, or the turning point in your manuscript, when I got to that point of reading how you solved some of these anagrams, which most of us never even imagined that these taunting letters were actually anagrams and needed to be decoded. Everybody was taking them at face value, but you had the brilliant idea of breaking them down and realizing that they were anagrams and finding these probable solutions. And like you said, when I read that 3 of the letters that you decoded led you to a probable evidence site for which the description matched perfectly to what he wrote in these coded anagrams, there was no other explanation in my mind for this. And something else I keep reiterating, we understand that you can find anybody's name in these letters, okay? You can find the letters of my full name in these anagrams, okay? But that does not leave you with the correct combination of letters to then decode the rest.
Right.
I don't know why that's such a difficult concept, but you have to know Gary Francis Post's full name and remove those letters from each anagram in order to be left with the correct set of remaining letters to solve each puzzle. There's no other cipher key that works other than his name, as you discovered.
Well, plus, if I may just say for the record, because, Will, our whistleblower, who told us about him in the first place, and he was on the run for his life, who is a hero in many ways because of what the courage he did, but he really had to run because Post had tried to kill him with a hammer. He gave me the guy's name. He gave me background.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you could say, I cheated. I don't do anagrams, right? I don't do, but what I did was simply just logic, a series of thousands of educated guesses and every time I needed to know something more about Post, I could call our whistleblower and others and ask it all about it. And slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle came together.
Yeah, and without forensics, I mean, putting the forensics aspect aside, this is almost how this case had to be solved. I mean, normally that you don't work a case, backwards with tunnel vision on one person, but in the Zodiac case, the way that you've broken it down, I think you almost had to work it backwards. And like Eric said earlier, basically deconstruct it or re-engineer it, working from current time backwards with those letters, and that's what you did. And I still fully 100% believe in your work and your research and your conclusions.
Well, thank you. But Eric, the interesting thing about this is, as time went on, Gary Francis Post, now at that point, 2016, turning 77, 78 years old, pretending to be senile, throws his wife down the staircase when we've now later learned, the case breaker says, he was thinking about killing her because she was going to go to the cops. And then other witnesses come forward. My God, I sent jailhouse letters to Post once he was in jail, and his cellmates read them, and they contacted me. And the next thing you know, they're signing sworn affidavits stating that Post is giving up the ghost in jail, telling details about his murder of Donna Lass and the cab driver in San Francisco. Yeah. The authorities have had all these since the judge had them. Sure. In the Post case. It's still public record, and yet, you're getting witnesses like that who are like, the only way he could tell details, as in the sworn affidavits, is if he'd done it.
Mm-hmm.
As we were going through this case, and I hate to say this, but a Monty Python sketch kept popping into my mind about, as we were talking to, as we were getting more information from different witnesses, and it was like, well, yeah, he was a nice guy, and he took these young men under his wing, and he was a mentor and everything else. It's like, well, do you think he could be the Zodiac killer? Oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, he could have killed anybody. And it's like, where were these folks, all these years during the investigation? Where I almost, and again, I look at him almost as you look at somebody who is a disease or an alcoholic, and it's like, not only does the alcoholic suffer themselves, is the immediate group around them also suffers to a degree, and then outside there's another band of folks that are associated with his family, even from like the neighbors, they've had to suffer through it. Then anybody investigating has had to suffer through it and destroy their careers. So it became one thing after another, where as we started looking, and the same thing happened with D.B. Cooper. It was just that, yes, he did all these murders, and it's very tough to plug in a upstanding citizen that was a veteran themselves and did some normal everyday things in their life. But then as you learn more and more and more about the individual's background, it's just these murders fit right in with the MO on this guy's life, and everything he had done, from his survival instincts to going after family members, the same family members that he had provided guidance to and almost acted as a father figure for. This same father figure was ready to kill Will at the drop of a hat, and that's right. When. That's when where you're just like, hey, he's a great, fantastic person. Well, could he have killed all these people? Oh yeah, absolutely. I could see him doing that. That part was stuck out to me as again, now all we need is a forensic piece to make, to have science say, yep, that was it.
And there's been one shortcoming, unfortunately, on the forensic side, although it can be remedied. But when Post was arrested in 2016 for that assault on his wife, they took his DNA because in California, the law was if you are arrested for a felony, your DNA is taken and put into CODIS. His DNA was taken, it was not put into CODIS. So that is one thing we're trying to remedy now with police departments, is to get his DNA put into CODIS, because who knows what's going to come up when they do that.
Can you
so
explain
that's just
CODIS?
another hurdle that we're trying to. Yeah, so CODIS is the DNA database, essentially, that is owned by the FBI. There's certain segments of the population whose DNA gets entered into CODIS. So Eric, you and me are in there because we were in the military.
Yeah.
It depends on the jurisdiction of the state. Usually, in most states nowadays, if you are convicted of a felony, your DNA automatically goes into CODIS. But at the time, in 2016 in California, the law was actually if you are arrested, not necessarily convicted, but arrested for a felony, your DNA goes into CODIS. And if you end up being acquitted, you can submit an appeal or a letter. At the time, this is back in 2016, you could submit an appeal or letter to the state of California to have your DNA removed from the database since you weren't convicted of the crime. And of course, the purpose of this is to link perpetrators to unsolved crimes. You know, usually rape, physical assault, murder, crimes where forensic evidence is left or DNA is left by the perpetrator. So the purpose of this database is to, ultimately solve some of these unsolved crimes through the use of DNA. So that's the overall purpose of CODIS.
So as we move on here, in a moment, I'm going to prepare you for this, because you both know that there are great implications that many other cases could be tied, cold cases across California,
Yes.
could be tied to Gary Francis Post. So prepare our audience for those answers in just a moment. But I just want to take a moment right now to tell the audience that they can help case breakers. If you want to donate, if you want to help assist in some way, if you are some sort of expert that could perhaps be retired, who has a little bit of time on his hands or her hands and wants to help case breakers, go to casebreakers.org and you can make a donation, because these folks right here you're looking at, all volunteers. We're all volunteers just trying to do a good deed and assist local and national law enforcement on cases that they don't have much time to do these days. So please go to casebreakers.org if you so wish, and assist any way you can. Make a donation if you like. All right, donate. A couple of facts here. Eric first. Eric Kleinsmith, Jennifer Bucholtz are experts on the Zodiac killer case. They've worked this case alongside me. I am still stunned, though, at how much further it's gotten since Case Breakers got involved. Since Case Breakers got involved, I've just been kind of a spectator watching it all happen. I become a witness, right? Not a guy who wrote a book, but it's just gone like this. I mean, there are cases in which Post is implicated directly in Santa Barbara, not just in Solano County, not just in Lake Tahoe, not just in San Francisco, not just in Riverside, right? Santa Barbara, 1963, a couple killed on the beach, murdered. Oceanside, a cabbie murdered in 1962. Same MO as the cabbie in 1969 in San Francisco. Another killing in San Diego. Eric, you first. Kind of walk us through how far Case Breakers has stretched the possibility that Gary Francis Post was one of the most notorious serial killers in California history.
The mystique about Post is more than anything else is the fact that he was never caught and never identified. There have been other killers on the west coast of the U.S. that have killed more people, but nobody has had that terror effect like he has, because it could have been anybody. And that's as soon as you don't identify the individual, then he becomes a ghost that is in every neighborhood, on every street, and in every locale. And so once we started identifying cases that were not necessarily tied to Zodiac officially, but but we found the same MO, the same types of people, same types of victims, the same settings, and now even there's going to be an issue with the watch that he was wearing. I mean, I won't get into the specific evidence of that, but that, those become new pieces that have tied him to these cases. And again, until we can get the forensic that puts that together, it just adds to the ghost of the Zodiac that is still haunting folks' memories, especially the investigators who tied themselves up and poured their career and their heart and soul into getting this one solved, and never having the satisfaction of doing that. That sticks, for 40, 50 years, between him and D.B. Cooper. It's the same thing. D.B. Cooper didn't kill anybody. He only stole less than $250,000 or through extortion and ransom. But the fact that he was never caught, the fact that he disappeared into thin air, and same thing with Post. He, at a point, and we think, when he had a major change in his life with the addition of the family, all of a sudden those killings stopped. Okay, so what happened? And so that's the mystique that carries into the movies and into the books and the names and everything else. It's not so much as the body count and the number of crimes committed. It's how much does that person resonate in somebody's mind and in their fears.
I think also, every case that's solved, no matter if it's high profile like this or not, there's lessons learned. And obviously, like Eric said, this investigation has stretched over half a century now. And if it can be solved, I do think that there will be a lot of lessons learned for, law enforcement, case breakers, any type of investigative agency out there. I think this one may bring forth some really valuable lessons that can be applied to future cases. And, also however you want to put it, it's kind of forcing us to think outside the box on how to eliminate or keep including Post as the most viable suspect. And so it's also kind of an exercise in stretching your brain and trying to come up with more investigative options that can be utilized to get these answers.
And just to add on to that, that's when I talk about the spark, that's really the spark at the end is, if I was working any cold case, that would be my new method of going after it. Besides understanding the case and what happened, the different pieces of hypothesis, I would take one of just start with the suspect that has not been exonerated or has not been discounted, and start walking that person back and looking for that spark. In every case that we've now worked, it's because somebody has remembered some piece of information that has never been brought forward previously, and it's come in at the tail end decades later and said, hey, you know what, did you guys think of this? And that became a spark for us to trace back and solve that case. If we went through every suspect that was named, we would spend 5 times as much investigative resources and power and time that we really don't have trying to go through each person. We were fortunate enough to get that spark and follow that spark backwards to bring this to the fruition and to our final result that Gary Francis Post was the Zodiac killer. We found nothing along the way that discounted him.
Yeah, on that note, going back years, sure, I was one of the kids that were terrorizing the school buses by the Zodiac in 1969.
Oh, right, that's right.
But I'd long since let it go. And when our whistleblower Will came to us, right, I didn't believe it, but then he gave me the name, Gary Francis Post. And at that point on, since you could see it in the Halloween card, folks, if you want to know more about these anagram solutions, the best article to go to is just Google my name, Dale Julin, Zodiac Killer, and Tahoe Tribune. That was published a couple days later from when Case Breakers broke worldwide. But that really goes into the details of what Jennifer and you, Eric, were talking about. Like, logically speaking, those anagram solutions take you to a crime scene. There's no way around it. And so if they want to know more about that, just go to that article. And what I want to do right now is sum up here, if you would. Final thoughts. You first, Eric, on where the case stands right now for those folks who are going to say, okay, all right, you just rehashed a lot of stuff that you've been doing, but where does it stand now in terms of the network doc that we're partners with, as well as what you're hearing from law enforcement at various agencies like Riverside?
Right. We're we've gotten to the point where we're having diminishing returns on what we can solve without law enforcement cooperation. And I can think of it in terms of, the poor victim, or the poor person who's the Riverside Police head of their forensic unit or the head of their public affairs. They got to be, oh my God, not another one. Anybody that's in that position is like, oh, by the way, you got to deal with the Zodiac killer. Why? Because every month somebody's going to come up and tell you that they solved the case, and you got to brush that off. And so we are just probably the 24th person in the last 24 months that have called them and said, hey, I think I solved your case for you. And it's like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with this again. So that's why, again, there's also resistance from law enforcement that we have to overcome from a cultural standpoint. Is they need a strong vetting process for folks who are working cases privately or with like our group ourselves. That please vet us. Please take a look at our backgrounds, our levels of experience, what we've found, and things like that. And instead of just dismissing us out of hand. And if I was in law enforcement, I'd be doing the same thing. It's like, oh gosh, another nut that thinks he solved this, and he thinks that the Zodiac killer found his way on the space shuttle before, just whatever you want to make up. Somebody's got a theory. That's what they have to sift through, all that, quite honestly, all that garbage and hot mess before they can really find a group that has stood up a viable team with tons of experience. We have forensic experts, we have folks from academia, we have former law enforcement, we have former intel folks, Jen and I, and it's not a bunch of folks sitting around drinking a beer or in our basements trying to figure out how to solve crimes in our spare time, and that's the kind of thing that to overcome the cultural barriers, that's what we need law enforcement's help to take a look at us and really give us the time of day that we can help them out.
Jennifer?
Yeah, and again, we're just after answers. So whether the answer, confirms or refutes Post as being the Zodiac, we're just after that answer. And I also want to reiterate that this is not a competition. A lot of people out there seem to think it's a competition and love to spout off immediately that we're wrong when they haven't even, like, Dale, a majority of your work hasn't even been published or publicized yet. So the general public doesn't even know the majority of what you've done or, the other evidence that has come forward. But that will come all out in due time. But in the end, we're just after an answer, just like any other case I work on. I'm just trying to find answers so I can get to that final conclusion.
Well, then I'll conclude with, and thank you both for joining us today, but I'll conclude with an answer that was given to us, case breakers, a little while back when he passed away. Gary Francis Post passed away in a secure, as in this is where you put people to throw their wives down the staircase when they say they're senile, secure facility in Stockton in August of 2018. He'd been in custody for a couple of years since that incident. And a family friend went to visit him shortly before he died. And I'll relate the story that he had about an answer he was given. He said, "Old man, are you really the Zodiac killer?" And Post answered, "If I told you I was, would I be in this nice place?" He'd be in the jail where he was before. Exactly. So, in one sense, I can simply say after looking into him, in a very real sense, he got away with it, but he spent the last couple of years in custody because of other things he did.
Yes.
Right. Jennifer, Eric, thank you both for everything you do, and thanks to Case Breakers too.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. I'm Dale Julian.
Yes.
Have a good day. Eric Kleinsmith and Jennifer Bucholtz, thank you both for everything you've done in this case and will continue to do as we go forward with a network partnership documentary deal about Gary Francis Post, the Zodiac killer. And if you want more information, please go to thecasebreakers.org and make a donation if you wish. All these folks are volunteering their time. They're experts. And if you have a way of helping out, please let us know by contacting us through thecasebreakers.org. Thank you.